I remember going to school and graduating and being like, I really have no fucking idea what I want to do.
Right.
Or like really how to like make money as a creative. I knew I wanted to use a camera, but had I had this podcast right when I graduated, I would have learned how to make six figures as a creative.
Yes. This episode specifically.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I think that's the whole goal of creators.
Absolutely.
You know?
So let's get into it.
Well, first I want to preface the reason we got inspired to make this was because I recently watched a webinar by this guy named Paul Weaver, and he had a whole webinar on like how to make six figures as a creative. And I was like, this is some really good information. The podcast listeners would really get some value out of it.
Hell yeah.
There we go.
Shout out Paul.
And a lot of it we've talked about, and you know, but we're really just grabbing all of it, taking all these different things that we've learned and kind of.
It's kind of like a step by.
Wow, dude, is that like
I know.
that going in the pack?
That's going in the pack. That'll be on
really
the Bfiggy
good
sound pack. I've been
That
practicing.
was like perfect.
Them practicing in the dungeon, but
yeah, but like you said, I'm pretty sure there's something in there that I even like fucking came up with that he stole from me, but it's all
Yeah. I also think that like you hear like six figures, making like over $100,000 a year as a creative. Like you think of that as like, that might feel impossible or unattainable, but like it really is feasible and attainable. And this is kind of like a step-by-step guide as like, this is how you should be running your business, and give you guys ideas on like how to reach out to clients and just how to run your business in the best way possible to make six figures.
Absolutely.
And like, this is how you make six figures as a creative.
This is very replicatable.
Yes.
You know, you can use this and you could have, you know, your X amount of clients that are making you said bag. And if you want to make more than that, you need to be able to hire people, bring on more clients, and just continue on the
Scale it
process
up.
out. Exactly.
And it's six figures is referring to US dollars.
US dollars, 100,000 of them.
Yeah. Not Colombian pesos, because that's like $10.
Number one, we got positioning. Now, this is how we're going to make ourselves look to potential clients that want to work with us, right? We've talked about this in the past too. We gave the example of like a wedding person, right? And a wedding person stuff should look vastly different from a guy like me who's sports content. I make ads. They're fast and loud. They're in your face. They're intense. I shouldn't go on to a wedding videographer's page and be like, there's all these colors and shit. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It should be maybe like lighter and brighter and maybe like a different font than like Helvetica bold in your face. Just something to think about.
Yeah, it's positioning is like how you position yourself to be able to work with the clients that you want to work with.
Totally.
And you might be, you know, if your positioning isn't strong, you're not going to be able to like attract the clients that you want to work with. Definitely. And so, you know, if your positioning isn't strong, this might be a couple of the reasons why. Either one, you're like lacking confidence as a photographer, videographer. Maybe you're first starting out and like just getting into it. So maybe there's clients that you want to work with, but you're like, I'm not at the level yet of being able to work with said client. The current clients that you are working with, let's say you have a couple like freelance retainer clients, they're paying the bills, but they're not the clients that you guys want to work with quite yet. You're like, this is what I'm doing now, but like, this is not what I see myself doing in the long run, or I want to be doing in the long run. And then the last reason might be you think that a brand is too big to be able to work with. And I'll give you a perfect example. Before Braden and I were living together, I did a brand deal with Converse. And when I got the email, it was an inbound lead for an Instagram brand deal. But I was like, holy shit, like I can't believe a brand of the size of Converse like wants to work with me. But you'd be surprised that like a lot of these big brands, they might seem like they're too big to work with, but oftentimes they will hire like freelance photographers, videographers, content creators, and you actually are able to work with them. But your positioning has to be strong enough to be able to work with them in the first place.
Totally. And like going off that, like they're like these brands seem huge and like mystical, like you could never approach them, but like their social media manager is just like another 26 or 23-year-old like us, just like, you know what I mean? Eating Wendy's and posting on Instagram. Like they're all just like us. And those are the people that you're communicating with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not communicating with some whatever name of that brand. It's like a person just like you.
Just a random person.
Yeah. So, okay, going off of like positioning, it's also like what makes you unique as a content creator. So this is why you want to think about like what your positioning is, because it's what separates yourself and what makes you unique. So some of the things that fall under positioning are technical skill, your style and aesthetic, your niche as a photographer or videographer, your experience or your background, your relationship to a market's consumer, and your personality. Braden and I were having a conversation the other day in the kitchen, and I was like, Braden, I think one of the best pieces of advice that you can give to like an up and coming creator is just to go experience life. because you can bring that into like your work. I remember when in my senior year, I took a business of acting class, and one of the things that we had to do was like reach out to a working successful actor and get a piece of advice. And I had a friend, Ray, whose dad was like, had been successful in acting. He wasn't anyone like crazy famous, but he was like working.
Right.
And he goes, the best piece of advice I can give you if you want to get into acting is to like just go experience life, because then you have stuff to pull from.
Right.
And I think that's such a great piece of advice for any creative in any field, is like the more you experience life, the more you can bring that into your work.
Because you can connect with like art if you have experienced like that, of like, oh, I've experienced that emotion, whatever. And then you can portray that as well when you're like shooting, or like, oh, this makes me feel like this when I shoot it like that. Or
Exactly.
yeah, that's beautiful.
100%.
And you got to be confident too in the stuff that you're telling them that you do. You don't want to get on the phone and be like, I'm a video person. I'll be like, I am a video producer. I make stuff that is like X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And I could help you do X, Y, and Z. And I think another thing, like when you get on the phone with any client, right, they have a problem. And so a lot of people, when they get on the phone with clients, they're trying to sell them stuff right off the bat. And it shouldn't be like that. I think the most success I've ever had on phone calls is like, you're just talking normal about whatever, you're shooting the shit, right? And then it's like, okay, I'm trying to help you solve said problem. And a lot of the times, I think people will be surprised that clients will tell you what the problem is. They will literally tell you what they want you to do for them. And stupid people don't listen.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
But you got to listen and be like, oh, okay. So you would like a video that does X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh my God, no way. Like,
he figured it out.
He figured this out. And they will literally tell you. So you just have to open your ears, put on your listening ears, and just try and connect with the person. Don't go full blower. They've already know for the most part what you do. If they click your reel and it's like under a minute and a half, like a normal reel or whatever, or you have a photo portfolio, it's like they know what you do.
Yeah.
Right.
They're aware of. They're like, I'm coming to said person for the problem, and you got to get it out of the problem.
I think if you change your perspective on a phone call with a said client, potential client, and switch it from trying to sell yourself to trying to serve the client, I think that's the best way to go about it, because you're like, how can I best serve you with the skills that I have as a photographer, videographer, as opposed to being like, let me tell you why you should work with me.
Right. And I do think, I think the positioning and having a formula for the positioning is important. So we'll go through an example of how to kind of get there, an equation. So you say like, I'm a blank photographer, videographer. So like for me, it'd be like car videographer, focused on providing, strategic content or like whatever you need that solves your problem, that enhances the customer journey for your brand. Right. And then you're pitching yourself, you're positioning yourself as a problem solver, not as just like a guy that makes videos that pushes buttons. You're like, oh, this is someone that's going to solve my problem. And you can just use that equation to really get there.
Yeah. And you should have this locked in as like an elevator pitch. When someone comes to you and says, what are you? I think a lot of times we can be like, I'm a photographer or I'm a videographer. But if you can have, a clear and concise one sentence elevator pitch of like what you are in a little bit more detail than just saying, oh, I'm a photographer.
Right.
I think that is a way to have your positioning much stronger.